Now, the risk in talking about neurobiology and suicide is that um, you might take a certain understanding of neurobiology or biology in general and bring it into these ideas. So oftentimes people think that our neurobiology is kind of fixed from birth or that, fixed from a young age. And it's really important to understand that our brains are constantly changing. They're developing and adapting. So whenever we learn anything, our brain has changed, and it does this in a number of different ways. It's highly plastic, or meaning it adapts to the environment around it. So I really want you to um, be able to check this idea that suicide is sort of a fixed outcome of a static brain, and and instead remember that life events change our brain. Now, one key set of life events to consider is ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. I'm not sure if you're familiar with ACEs, but they've become much more on the radar in regards to psychology, because there's been a number of studies that have demonstrated how much they can change our physical health and our psychological health. And ACEs are, I'm not sure if you could read it here, but there's a few different types of ACEs. There's abuse ACEs, which include physical, emotional, and sexual abuse. And then there's neglect, physical or emotional. And then they have ACEs that are related to household dysfunction. So mental illness in the family, incarceration by parents, divorce, and other ones, and malnutrition. And so there's a number of different ACEs that have been recognized as playing into difficulty adjusting. In ACEs, um, again, they're social, but they actually seem to cause changes in our biology, including our neurobiology. And the thought is that they might cause changes in neurotransmitter systems, such as those involved in mood regulation, right? Whether we feel good or bad or depressed or anxious, and decision making. And one thought is that particularly that ACEs could increase our diathesis in serotonin transmission, the transmission of serotonin from neuron to neuron, noradrenergic transmission, which again is norepinephrine, and then finally hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis functioning. So this is a system in our body that starts with the thalamus, or sorry, it starts with the hypothalamus in our brain and goes to the pituitary gland, and then goes to the adrenal gland in our above our kidneys. And it's this axis, this connection between our brain and our body, is involved in our fight or flight response. And so the thought is that ACEs could kind of mess up our fight or flight response. And again, that could potentially have an impact on our risk for suicide. So ACEs could cause changes in the systems that regulate serotonin release, um, particularly leading to decreased serotonin release. ACEs might cause changes in the noradrenergic or norepinephrine system, causing a depletion of norepinephrine. And they might impact functioning of the HPA axis. But currently, the research on how that could play out is a little unclear. But again, what I like about this idea, and this is from the article still, um, is that it's connecting together our nurture with our nature, and saying that uh, you cannot you cannot say it's one or the other, because our nurture can change our nature. And um, and so it really emphasizes that we need to have a holistic solution to um, to suicide. We need to appreciate the biological, but of course we also need to recognize the psychosocial, the experiences that we have, especially experiences in childhood. Now, these ideas of how adverse childhood experiences affect our neurobiology are predominantly about a diathesis, because, of course, most people who die by suicide later on in life, not in childhood. So the thought is that these increase our vulnerability in ways that play out later on in life. Or to say it differently, it's a diathesis or a vulnerability a person might have that they can carry throughout their whole life. And so, again, neurobiology could make a person more impacted by stressful situations, um, and so their vulnerability is lower, in the sense of resiliency, and so they might a stressor might take less to get over that threshold to be able to lead a person towards suicide. But it's also important to consider that neurobiology can be at play in our stress response, in the sense of our immediate response to stressors in our environment. And one thought there is that our hormone systems can actually be at play. So perhaps we have hormones that like corticotropin releasing hormone or glucocorticoids that could play a role in making a person more susceptible to stressful circumstances. So it's important to recognize that neurobiology plays a part in the stress response, although this is harder to study than these long-term diatheses that a person might show. Because like I said in an earlier video, it's harder to get a person who's in immediate crisis to do a brain scan or a blood test or saliva test. And so we know less about it at that critical phase.